one of my biggest learnings so far is that it's just really about the people. What matters most every day is my customers and the people that I employ, making sure they're happy, making sure they have an enjoyable place to work, a safe place to work. And that really, I do all of this for those two groups of people.
Welcome to Honest Ecommerce, where we are dedicated to cutting through the BS and finding actionable advice for online store owners.
I'm your host, Chase Clymer.
And I'm your host, Annette Grant.
And we believe running an online business does not have to be complicated or a guessing game.
If you are struggling to scaling your sales, Electric Eye is here to help. To apply to work with us, visit electriceye.io/connect to learn more.
And let's get on with the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Honest Ecommerce. I'm super excited today to be speaking with Kimberly Lewis. Kimberly is the co-founder of the wildly successful CurlMix, a beauty brand for curly hair. But this is a really interesting show today. They've done a lot of really cool stuff with the brand, been featured on Shark Tank, which I know is a buzzword for a lot of our listeners. But let's kind of take it back. Before you guys had this multi-million-dollar brand, you met your co-founder in high school. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let's talk about that. So who is your co-founder?
My co-founder is my husband, Tim. Our names actually rhyme. We're Kim and Tim and have been for like the last decade. But we met back in high school.
Absolutely. So did you guys ever expect that you'd be running a business together?
Not early on. Early on, Timothy wanted to be a professor. It's totally not what he's doing now. He wanted to get paid to read and do work and research and just spend out his days reading really thick books and doing lots of research and telling people about what his studies were. And then I was going to be in corporate. I was going to be in corporate America, the perfect worker bee. And I spent all of my years in college just really trying to be that, the perfect suits and learning to talk, to wear pumps and pencil skirts to all my meetings. And, we spent a lot of time trying to look the part in business school, which is kind of funny. And in our last year of school, I had to build an app for curly hair, whatever interest I had. And then we got introduced to like the entrepreneur segment, if you will, at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And we didn't even know it existed. It was basically called Research Park. And that's where they had like incubators and such and just things like that. And we had no clue those things even existed. And so we were kind of bummed that it was our last semester when we figured it out. But we were like, you know what, maybe we should become entrepreneurs. Like maybe that's the only way to like really make this kind of wealth or money that we had anticipated, in life. We knew that we couldn't get there with a job. And so we were like, okay, let's just figure this out. And so we started our first business as a social network for natural hair. And if you know anything about tech or, you know that niche social networks don't work because you can never really compete with the Googles, the Facebooks, the, Pinterest and Twitter. You just can't compete with these really, really large companies. And so we did that for about a year and a half and just decided that the business that we would do the next time would make money on day one. And we wouldn't spend a year and a half doing something that didn't have a real revenue model. And that is how we landed on CurlMix. So it's kind of funny. So that's how we landed on e-commerce, because you get, you sell something, you get a check, you get a check or you get a payment. And that wasn't the case for a lot of tech companies that you see out there.
Yeah, with tech, it's a lot of build the MVP and test and pivot and test. But the cool thing about e-com is if you build a product people want, you can make money that same day.
It's validated. Exactly.
Awesome. So what was the first product you guys came out with?
It was a do-it-yourself box for curly hair. So basically, we would send you a box with, 3 to 5 ingredients to make your own hair care products. And we did that for about 2 years. Well, I think it was a little bit more than 2, but basically we realized that it wasn't going to get us to this multi-million-dollar success that we were longing for. But in the event of doing that, we got a lot of research and figured out what our customers actually liked. So, I used to say that, we kind of failed, but it was just CurlMix 1.0, and CurlMix 2.0 was actually implementing what we had already validated. So we ended up turning our best-selling boxes into a hair care line where our flaxseed gel was our best seller. So flaxseed gel was originally only a do-it-yourself product. You couldn't get it in stores. People just wouldn't make it. It was too much work for manufacturers. And most people didn't know how to scale the process. And so Tim and I did what the hard thing was to do and figured out how we could actually scale it and really found our niche in the market for that item.
Awesome. So I want to kind of unpack that a bit. So you guys launched with a do-it-yourself box. Now, was that under the CurlMix brand?
Yes.
Okay.
That was where the name came from. You're mixing for your curls.
Oh, yeah, makes sense. All right. And then you found the best-selling products from the data of selling that box and turned those into your own proprietary line.
Yes.
That's you just using data to make you money. That's amazing.
Thanks. At the time, I didn't see it that way. At the time, I was like, my business is failing. But I had a conversation with a friend. She was making hair care products at the time. And she was telling me that the industry's margins were like 70% on average for, other hair care companies. And I was like, wait a minute, the margins on my boxes are 30%. And that's when I realized a lot of box companies have 30% margins. I'm like, there's no way I can ever compete with other hair care companies if they're getting 3 times or, 2 or 3 times as much as I'm getting for every customer sold. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And basically when I realized that, I was like, okay, I have to do something different because this isn't going to scale. There's a reason that we're struggling. And this isn't going to change. It's only going to get worse. So what do my customers really want? By us not growing really fast and them not coming back as much as I wanted them to, let me know that this wasn't I wasn't doing what they actually wanted, So I stopped doing what I wanted, which was the do-it-yourself box, and started doing what they wanted, which was making a product for them, but making a unique product for them.
Yeah, the done-for-you solution. I mean, I think hindsight's always 20/20, and with that one, someone would get the box and make what they wanted, but at the end of the day, they didn't want half those ingredients. They wanted exactly what they wanted. And, that's oftentimes what you find when you're offering any sort of service out there or trying to educate people about how to do it yourself. They just end up going like, can you just do what I want?
Right. Or can you just do it for me? Because we found that our best customers were like, their boxes were piling up. They love the products. They love the ingredients, but it was like, I can't reasonably do this every time I do my hair.
Yeah. So it was a little time consuming.
Yes, that is exactly what it was.
You were solving a pain point of your own product, just making it better.
Right, precisely. And then when I did that, I realized I could sell it at the same price because nobody else was doing it, So. And
then were you hitting the margins that you had dreamed of?
Oh yeah, I was hitting margins that everybody dreamed of, and then I got copycats.
Hey, imitation is the most sincerest form of flattery.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about one of the first amazing parts of your story, the $1 million launch.
Yes.
So was this with the now done for you kit?
Yes. So we started with the gel. January of last year, we made about $3,000 in the month of January. And we had completely switched our model and started making this flaxseed gel done for you service. I freaked out and I was like, oh my gosh, our business is, at the time we were used to our best month ever as a do-it-yourself box. We made maybe like 17,000 in a month. And so pivoting the business that month, we only made 3,000. I was kind of like freaking out, this is back to day one. Right. And then my husband was like, no, Kim, you knew that 1 January was going to be slower. You knew this is a pivot. We're on the right track. Just keep going. So I went to a conference called Traffic Sales and Profit. And one of the founders of the conference was like, basically, it's easy to sell your old customers new things than it is to sell new customers anything.
Oh, yeah.
So I went back to my old customers. Okay, you guys like the gel. What else do you guys like? And they were like, oh, we love the moisturizer. I use them together. And then I found out they were using the moisturizer and the gel to get this wash and go look. I had no idea that they were doing that, right? And so at this time I had expanded the fragrances of the gel and I was like, okay, well, I'll go ahead and add the moisturizer because this is what they want. And then I did that. And then we also added the serum and the body butter. Those are our other top sellers. So within those 3 months, and then we also started working with micro influencers. So we would give them a code, they would earn a percentage of sales and our customers would get a discount when they came through those micro influencers. And the second month in February, we did about 8,000. So I was like, okay, cool. We doubled last month. This is great, And then the third month, we ended up hitting 30,000 when we introduced micro influencers. and my micro meaning less than 20,000 followers on Instagram, which converted way better than any macro influencer we ever used. So I was like, wow, like this is it. And so I was like, we've never made this much money ever before or seen this kind of growth. And my husband, he ended up quitting his job that March and came to work full time on the business. And I think that was the biggest benefit in all of that, because I basically got somebody who's pretty much brilliant to come and work for free. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing when they do e-commerce or just, start businesses. They try to do it by themselves. And you really need somebody to work in the front of the house and the back of the house, right? So my job is front of the house. It's marketing. It's customer service. It's the finance stuff. The back of the house is the operations, the making the product, shipping it, making sure people are getting what they need. And so he really took over that part of the business. And so that was a tremendous help. And so then after we had 30,000, and the following month we did a little bit, 25K, but then in the next month we did like 45K, and the next month 66,000. And then we hit our first 6-figure month in August. Oh, and I introduced Facebook ads in April. So I hadn't spent any money on Facebook ads from January to March. So that $30,000 was just, all like, it was not all profit, but I didn't have to pay for advertising for it. But for the April, we started pairing our efforts with Facebook ads, which I feel like was probably the best thing that we could have ever done, because we weren't trying to make demand. You know what I mean? Like we were trying to validate it, if you will, and validating it in the absence of paid advertisements.
So there's something that you mentioned a few times already in this podcast, which I just want to point out, and I've speak on this before, is you have said multiple times, we asked our customers, we interviewed our customers. How crucial do you think that was to the growth of the business?
I think it was huge in the beginning. I think, because you're really just, as an entrepreneur, you really are just a servant. And I know that like, it's like, yeah. Like, I know, serve my customers. But really, if you don't do what if they want, right? Then like, what's the point of being in business? No one's I think a lot of us just want to get paid to do what we want to do. But that's just not what entrepreneurship is. It's solving people's problems. It's making life easier for them. It's creating a real solution in the market. And I think it just requires a servant attitude,
Absolutely. I think that people are, once they kind of hit that first kind of burst of sales, they're like, well, my idea is validated now. It's like, well, no, you found a market. I bet you there's a better idea in there, and just ask around. You'll find out. And
I think that's been like our claim to fame, is a constant iteration. So basically my first foot in the door into the hair care space was our social network, and we were educating people on hair care. It didn't work as a business model, but I learned so much about hair and what our customers really wanted. And then we started a do-it-yourself box, right? Based on what we learned from that first business. And then I learned what my customers really were willing to pay for, right? Not, and they'll say they want one thing, right? Everyone says they care about ingredients and they want the most natural product, but what they're willing to pay for is somebody who saves them time. So, and then it gets the same results, right? And so then that's when we figured out what product they were actually wanting. And then after we figured out that, we ended up scaling to what we have now with our 4-step system to get you the wash and go of your dreams. So basically, we started with the end of our line. Our 4-step system has a shampoo, a conditioner, a moisturizer, and a gel. The gel is what we created first. The moisturizer is what we created second. And the shampoo and conditioner, we didn't launch until an entire year later, which was February of this year. And now we have a full system.
That's awesome. So you guys have this amazing launch. You have these amazing products that you've developed. How did you end up on Shark Tank?
My husband and I have been watching Shark Tank for years. I mean, oh my gosh, years. And that's actually how we got the idea for the do-it-yourself box, which is really funny because we saw a lady on there doing it for cookies. And we were like, I wonder if anyone does this for hair, because I spend hundreds of dollars at Whole Foods and I don't even know if the product is going to turn out the way I want it to. So that was really serendipitous and full circle. But in Shark Tank, my auntie just sent us an email. They were casting here in the neighborhood. And my husband and I went, we took the baby. We didn't think we would actually make it on the show, but we knew that like our story was compelling. Like the Kim and Tim.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Stories, really.
At least it'd be fun at the end of the day. You know, you got something to talk about.
Yeah, we were curious. We were so nervous. We rolled up with the baby in tow, like he was in a stroller. And then we kind of pitched. We were starting saying like, "Hi, I'm Kim and I'm Tim," and blah blah blah. And she kind of like started smiling at the end, and she was just like, after we pitched, we had told her all of our numbers and this, that, and the other. And this was like May of last year. She was like, "I like that you're Kim and Tim." And I was like, oh my goodness, like, okay, so she liked us. But you only get to talk to one judge at a casting. So if they don't like you, then that's it. And so it's like, what is it? It's harder to get on Shark Tank than it is to get into Harvard, which I think is funny.
That is.
It's been like 30 or 40,000 applicants per year. And then they actually only end up selecting 88 to pitch on the actual show. So kind of crazy. But after that, they kind of take you through it. So they called us maybe 2 weeks later and we kind of freaked out. We screamed or whatever, but that was only for a short minute. It was a super long email with a bunch of things you had to do. And then basically they're doing rounds of cuts, I think 3 or 4 more times before you actually make it onto the show. And some people get cut the day before, so like it literally is just, sometimes it feels like just chance. It's a combination of like what they're looking for and what you bring to the table. And then really, I think what's the most important is your story. You have to have a really good story because, they're essentially creating TV, right? Mm-hmm. It's supposed to be entertainment for people at home. People at home want to see themselves and the founders. They want to see, how you got to where you are. And so really communicating that story is going to make a difference when you actually audition. And then we drilled our pitch like, I don't know, insanity. Like we felt we were back in college or something. And I think we actually studied harder for this than we did for any exam that we would have ever studied for in college. We rewrote our pitch maybe 7 times because it was tough because we were still trying to figure out the brand. We were in the midst of a pivot, right? So, we were focusing on this flaxseed gel, even though, the brand was growing into something else. And by the time the episode would air, which would be 6 months later, we filmed in like September, so it aired in March, we would be a different business. So it's like, what message should we be sending? Are we pitching the right stuff? It was really stressful, actually, but still amazing, a really amazing opportunity as well.
That's awesome. So you guys are there, you're on the show. How was meeting the judges? How was the whole experience of the pitching? And then you guys actually turned down an offer, didn't you?
Yes. So you don't see the judges before you go on the show. So like when I'm pitching them is the first time I get to see them. So then you're like nervous as I'll get out. I mean, literally just, what are they, frogs in your throat or like butterflies in your stomach? It just everything. It's probably the most nerve-wracking experience you've ever had because you're basically pitching billionaires, right? Or at least one billionaire, right? There's billions of network in the room.
Plus they're celebrities.
Yes, that's the other factor. So you've been watching them on your TV for the last 10 years or whatever, and you finally get to talk to them. So that's like nerve-wracking in itself. But it was funny because after I pitched and we came down the deal, I ended up seeing Robert in his golf cart, and he came up behind me and shook me. He's like, "You should have taken the deal." It was so funny. He was laughing though. He's being really silly. I thought it was really sweet.
That's awesome.
Support for our podcast comes from our friends at Simpler, a new way to staff 24/7 sales and customer service on your e-commerce store. It works with your existing email and chat platforms, so setup is quick and easy.
Simpler's network of on-demand, U.S.-based Simpler specialists are standing by to answer your customers' most common questions. Set it up for free today and then turn it on or off depending on your customer volume. You only pay $2.25 for every resolution. No hidden fees, contracts, or minimums.
Close more sales with Simpler by staffing your email and live chat around the clock with Simpler specialists.
Start your free 7-day trial at simpler.ai/honest. That's simpler.ai/honest.
People don't realize a lot of the drama is done up for television. But basically, we turned down the offer because we just knew we were going to grow really fast and a whole lot more than the Sharks knew. And they weren't willing to take the risk. And we felt like we were a really good risk to take because we'd already done a lot of the legwork as far as research. And this wasn't our first rodeo. Technically, I like to look at CurlMix. This is like our second and a half or third startup. Like we know what not to do now. And so we're just a safer bet than maybe most founders on their first try. But basically, we kind of set up what we would and wouldn't take the night before between a conversation between Tim and I. And we actually went back to watch the Ring episode. The founder of Ring, he ended up exiting to Amazon for $1 billion. And he was on the Shark Tank show, and he kind of had a similar valuation that we had, but he was like kind of laughed off of the show, right? And so we're like, okay, well, we want to be able to tell America our story and make sure we get our story across. Like, we can't go in there with a valuation that that matches Jamie's. I think that was his name. And so we lowered our valuation. And when the sharks still wouldn't budge, we were like, we know we can't go any lower because we've already cut it in half. And so, we walked away. And I think it was the best decision for us because we ended up raising money at a much more favorable valuation after the show aired. So
I got a few questions there. One, going into it, did you guys have a conversation like we're prepared to say no?
Yes.
All right.
Not entirely. We were prepared to say no if it's the wrong offer. So I think it was like we wouldn't give up anything more than 15% of our company. And we went in there with a 10% offer, mainly because we were convinced that if we went anything with any offer with single digit numbers, that the sharks wouldn't even hear us. And so we were like, okay, we'll do 10%, but we can't go above 15 because we know at some point we may have to raise money again. And 15% is kind of criminal from a venture capital perspective, right? Usually a round is like 20%. But you're getting like $1 million or a couple $1 million for a 20% round, not 400,000 for 20%. That's what Robert wanted. So it's like half as much money as you would get anywhere else. And Robert had mentioned that he didn't know anything about hair care. So we knew he wouldn't be able to help us scale, it would just be a check, which you could just get from a bank, And so we basically went in with our walkaway numbers, or in MBA school, they call it your BATNA. It's better alternative to negotiating an agreement. It's like, we can't come to a consensus, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? And so we knew we would walk away if it was anything more than 15%. Didn't matter the cash value.
Absolutely. So I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this is Shark Tank. The offers from Shark Tank are a little, I'm just going to say they're definitely in the shark's favor, right?
Always.
So you'd say traditional, kind of doing traditional rounds in the whole venture ecosystem would make for a better financial deal for an entrepreneur?
100%. And sharks know that. They know that if you went to a traditional venture fund, that the conversation would be different. The expectations would be different. You would get more equity as a founder, or they wouldn't take as much, I think they'd make a lot of the math simple for at-home viewers.
Yeah.
So that you guys can easily calculate it. But one person having 1 or 2% of your company is still a lot. But they do it in 5s and 10s, 15, 20s, and 30s. And that's just not how venture capital is done. And we've raised $1 million in funding, led by the CEO of LinkedIn and some of his partners and Backstage Capital. And so that said, it was nowhere near, it's like 10% of our company. It's nowhere near the 20% Robert wanted for $400,000. And it was 1.2 million, not 1 million. So you'll get a much better deal if you go the traditional venture route.
That's amazing advice right there. I know that Shark Tank is kind of just the golden goose of entrepreneurship, but it's kind of just to be a little, maybe it plays up to the vanity, but not so much. It's just, I don't know where I was going with that thought, really.
No, it's okay. Some people, because some people's dream is to be on a show, which is great. And I mean, it was wonderful for our sales for sure. But if you go on the show and you don't get, you really want to, there are other ways to get capital. There are better ways to get capital,
Yeah. And then that was actually a question I had. So do you have the math worked out on what kind of bump after the airing happened for the sales?
Yeah. I think we made a few $100,000 extra from the airing. So the month before Shark Tank, we did maybe like 300,000 in sales. And the month of Shark Tank, even though we upped our spending as well. So we always spend about maybe like 30% of revenue on sales. We upped our spending to maybe like $250K that month. But we ended up doing 900,000 that month. And that was like our best month to date. So it was like almost $1 million in a month, which is insane because last year, that's pretty much all we did for the entire year. So you can imagine my staff was like swamped. But, and then that's the other thing, people don't tell you this, but like sometimes people go out of business after Shark Tank because they can't handle such the influx of orders. So it was a lot around getting prepared for the show on like the production side. But even like there are certain things you want to do to your site for it to be ready when a Shark Tank airs. We had to upgrade to Shopify Plus a couple months ahead of time to deal with the traffic. We had to make sure we had all our email captures in place and our ads going, our retargeting ads, especially because we knew we were going to get traffic of people who are just lurkers and not buyers. There's so much more to be done when you find out you're going to air, because it's like the biggest opportunity you might get. So you don't want to mess it up.
Yeah, I think right there is an amazing piece of advice. Be it Shark Tank or a press feature, or you happen to have a piece of content go viral. All of those things you just mentioned are things you really need to consider.
You wouldn't believe the work. I feel like I didn't sleep those 3 weeks, because you get 3 weeks. 3 weeks ahead of time if it's actually going to air. Because even if you film, you don't know if it's going to air. And you don't know when it's going to air. And so that's the crazy thing. So you get 3 weeks to get ready for, hundreds of thousands of visits to your website in a day. It's just it was crazy. It was crazy.
Oh, I mean, I am guilty of this when I watch Shark Tank. The second something I'm interested in pops up there, I'm instantly on their website.
Yep.
And you know what? To be honest, I've seen some really bad websites.
And you know what? It's because sometimes people ended up being on the show and they're like just really a gimmicky kind of product. They're not like focused on being a real business. And so they don't even, they have no clue what to do. Because we were already making, 6 figures monthly before the show aired. But if we had been featured in Shark Tank, maybe the 3rd month in business, oh my goodness, we would have been, we didn't have any, first of all, we weren't spending any money on advertising, right? So there's no way you're going to do $1 million a month on, any Shark Tank episode airing in today's day and age, because your site wouldn't have been nearly ready for something like that. You know what I mean? It would have crashed. You probably would have still been on the basic version of Shopify's payment plan. You probably don't have a customer service team in place or chat or live chat. You don't have, it's just a million things. So I'm just lucky that we were ready when we were actually on the show. And it wasn't my business 2 years ago, where we had a bunch of do-it-yourself boxes and we would have lost money because we weren't having high margins on the boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely can agree there. I've seen a few pitches that were, I would say, just there for comic relief.
Right. Entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key. The show is 100% entertainment and maybe 20% helping entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I think the biggest benefit to Shark Tank is helping me figure out the math. Like if you don't know anything about venture capital, I think it's a good show to watch, right? But then once you learn venture capital and you learn like real business, you're like, oh, a lot of this is not entirely accurate,
Yeah, there's a lot more numbers that go into it.
Right, precisely.
All right. So post Shark Tank, you guys have been cruising along now. So what would you say in this whole journey of yours, what's the biggest lesson you've learned?
The biggest lesson that I've learned is that... Or
I can phrase it in a different way. What's the biggest mistake you've made?
No, that was good. The biggest lesson I've learned is that, the goal is not to not work. I think people think that, but at every stage it requires a different Kim or a better Kim. And one of my biggest learnings so far is that it's just really about the people. What matters most every day is my customers and the people that I employ, making sure they're happy, making sure they have an enjoyable place to work, a safe place to work. And that really, I do all of this for those two groups of people, my employees and my customers. And so, and that's something I don't think people think, you start your own business as a way to leave your job, to not work with the petty people you work with now, or, as a way to escape. But what you don't realize is that if you're successful, you're going to build a better version of what you left. You know what I'm saying? And that's crazy to think. So it's okay. Well, what's the purpose of all of this at the end of the day? And it's really just the people that you serve on both ends of it.
That's a great answer. Awesome. So as a millennial, as an African-American, what's like the biggest goal in impacting your community and generation that you guys have?
I like to create more jobs. I think... And I like to pay people better than what I think the industry pays them. So I think like minimum wage is something like $9 or something like that. They just raised it here in Chicago, but none of our employees make less than $17 an hour. Because I just don't believe you can live on, $10 an hour here in Chicago, right? You can't make a living wage there. I think it's actually close to the poverty line, which is insane to me. And so that's been a goal of mine, is to make sure that we employ people with a lifestyle that's reasonable and, something that's fulfilling and happy, again, the people matter most. And so that's a goal of mine, is to just employ people, more people who look like me too. We hire from a lot of underserved communities. Our staff, we have about staff of maybe 15 to 20 folks in our manufacturing facility. And they are from the South Side, the West Side, here in Chicago. And it makes me happy. And that's my goal, is to continue serving them.
That's amazing. So you all of your production is there in Chicago?
Yes, we have all of our production is in Chicago. Some of the small pieces of our production we outsource, but even still, that's still here in Chicago to another company who's employing people from the same communities. So yes. That's
a great mission.
Thank you.
Awesome. So as we kind of wrap up here, what's next for CurlMmix?
My goal is to make $10 million this year.
Oh, well, I hope that you do that.
Thank you. I hope so too.
All right. Well, if people are inspired by you and they want to know more about you, where can they find you online? Where can they check out the products?
They can check out the products at CurlMmix.com. And if you want to follow me and Tim specifically, we really only post our kid. He's 1 year old. He's 1 year old. And we're pregnant, so I post a lot of pregnancy stuff. But my personal Instagram on Kim and Tim Lewis. Kim and Tim Lewis.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We can't thank our guests enough for coming on the show and sharing the truth. Links and more will be available in the show notes. If you found any actionable advice in this podcast that you'd like to apply to your business, please reach out at electriceye.io/connect.
Please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice.